welcome to this Budget and Performance Committee. We've got apologies for Gareth Bacon, that's why I'm sitting in the chair, Len Duval. We've also had apologies from Umesh Desani. I don't think there's any other apologies, or in a sense we've got a substitute, Keith Prince's substitute for Gareth Bacon. So welcome to the committee. Okay, in terms of the formal business, we've got Lynn Garner, Chief Exec Officer of the LLDC, and Gerry Murphy. I can't read your title from here. It's a rather long title. On my eyesight, I should have my glasses
Executive
on.
Director of Financial, Commercial and Corporate Services at LLDC. Should have gone to sticks, eh?
Very good, very good. Good start to the day. Okay, so can I ask everyone to check their electronic devices and switch to silent mode? Is there any other issues that I need to know? No, let's get into the formal business, declarations of interest. I am a season ticket holder of West Ham United Football Club.
I'm a supporter of West Ham United Football Club.
Any other declarations?
Well, just to extend our commiserations to the people. Oh, sorry.
8-0, mate. 8-0.
Okay, moving on to the minutes. Can we just agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of July,
Agreed.
2018? Agreed. And can I just also then move on to item 4, summary list of actions? Can we note the report that's before us?
Noted.
Okay, we're now with our main business. Welcome to the London Legacy Development Corporation. Look, we're going to ask a whole number of questions and we're going to come at you in different ways. It won't be just one member, I would imagine, on one particular topic, because I might come in on a whole number of topics. In terms of just setting the scene, the first one, let's talk about where we are with the stadium. Can you just remind us what the independent report, because that's your target, I know you may have revised certain things since then, what the independent report said were the losses or problems associated with the stadiums generally. Do you just want to give us a quick pen picture of that?
The Moore-Stevens report?
Yeah.
So the Moore-Stevens report talked about ongoing losses between 10 and 20 million deriving from the contractual matrix of the concession agreement with West Ham, the access agreement with UK Athletics, and the operator contract with LS185. So there are, I think, the Moore-Stevens report indicated three main areas that are driving that deficit. One is in relation to the cost of moving the seats. One is in relation to the commercial returns coming back from the stadium. And the last is in relation to the absence of a naming rights contract. Within the commercial returns, although I can't quote the Moore-Stevens report, there's a long discussion about the impact of the West Ham contract on net commercial returns coming into the stadium. Is that what you wanted?
That's fine. It's a good, nice little pen picture. Now, you've had a chance to look at that 10 to 20 million. What do you think it is then? What's the figure we're working to? What you think is the loss? They said 10 to 20. Am I being unfair asking you what you think it is now?
No. The current forecast of operating loss before exceptional items for 18-19 is around 15 million. That's down from last year's 20 million operating loss, and the major movement of that reduction is in the change in seat costs. The reduction in seat costs that we've been able to deliver. We flagged it sort of this time last year that we were looking at the seat configuration in the hope of making savings, and we feel comfortable that we're delivering 7 million savings between the cost of fully moving the seats, as we did last year, and the 4 million.
We're going to go into detail of the seats, but fine, as long as we get that, we're going to go into greater detail of that. Okay, let's turn to the stadium and the relationship with West Ham then. So, Lynn, you've inherited, quite frankly, I don't think I can say what you've inherited. I'd be bleat for this family audience that may well be listening into this discussion in terms of all that Gerry Murphy has just outlined, and then this quite a complex relationship with your principal tenant. I think that's how we could describe them, the key tenant. So where would you describe the current relationship with West Ham?
I think the first thing to recognise is that both West Ham and LLDC, and generally the Mayor, we all have at the heart of our interests the success of this stadium. And it is successful in many ways. It drives a fantastic economic benefit for London. But we, on the public sector side, are for historical reasons facing significant losses on an annual basis. At the end of the day, although we're all vested in the success of the stadium, including the football club, we have a commercial relationship. We are a public sector body in a commercial relationship with a private business. That means, because of the facts of the existing contract, where there's a potential for an additional return or a commercial discussion, we need to have a commercial discussion to drive the best value we can from that relationship. It's a business relationship first and foremost, but it's grounded in a joint interest in future success. Now, I am new to the role. Both West Ham and ourselves want to make that relationship a success. I've come into the role at a time when there's some litigation around some areas, and so that's made the relationship a little bit tense. But I think we are both optimistic that we can drive a much better relationship into the future. And that's a matter of working through some of these shorter-term issues in the interim.
And let's talk about the litigation now, because that bill seems to be hiring. And I seem to recall at a previous meeting I asked Gerry what the costs were. This latest bout of litigation, we must be in total from previous contracts. And the only reason why I ask about this issue is because it's fundamental in the relationships, because even though that you're optimistic about future relationships, we are in the courts, aren't we?
Yes.
In many ways about the legacy of these contracts that you've inherited. So how much to date have you spent, LLDC, on defending, you would argue, the public interest?
Over the last 3 years, our legal costs in relation to West Ham are, by the end of this year, we're forecasting about 4 million.
4 million for this year?
Over the last 3 years.
Last 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
I
seem to think it's a bit higher than that. Do you want to double check your figures?
Total, there are other legal costs associated with the operation of E20. But over the last 3 years, in relation to West Ham, we will have spent 4 million by the end of this financial year.
And in terms of just building on that relationship then, back to you, Lynn, how do you see a way around this? Because we've got, a contract that was negotiated by a previous administration, that there's still a substantial amount of money that West Ham pay in for the use of the stadium, they would argue.
Yes.
The 3 million figure is there as your key anchor tenant in that sense. What's the strategy? When will, because it doesn't look like a good relationship at the moment with all the litigation going on, both sides, you defending, and are you threatening or are you defending?
We're defending. Look, we know, don't we, we've got complex contracts here, but one of the key issues with the contracts is its lack of clarity around some things. And there is a distinct lack of clarity around additional seating capacity within the stadium. So at the moment, the contract is very clear that we must provide a minimum of just under 54,000 seats as part of that contractual piece. West Ham feel that in their concession agreement, they're entitled to up to 60,000 seats and possibly some more in terms of capacity. We feel that that's not explicit in the contract. It would be rather expensive if we simply allowed that to happen because we'd have to pay all the costs, and we think there's a commercial position as well, and so we're defending that position. Okay. And a lot of these, all of these litigation items are rooted in the lack of clarity in the original contract. You know, for the public sector to enter into a major litigation, we take professional legal advice. We are advised as to how strong our case is, whether there's a case to be made. But where we are being litigated against, we feel where we're getting the right legal advice and legal advice that says there's a case to answer, then we must defend it in order to protect the public purse. Coming back to the relationship, Chair, what I'm trying to do here, and I guess I've come in at a difficult time whilst there's litigation going on, is putting the litigation to one side, starting to think about what the long-term relationship might be for the benefit of the stadium. We're running this great multi-use venue. I think there are other win-wins we could be discussing in a strategic fashion with the football club, but I cannot prejudice legal action that's currently listed. In this case, the capacity case is listed for this side of Christmas. So you know, it's a difficult conversation because there's litigation going on. That doesn't stop me being optimistic about the future. Okay,
but on that litigation, and we have to, I think you're right, sometimes you have to defend the public interest from the LDDC's point of view and from City Hall's point of view. What success have we had in this litigation rounds? Have we had any? Just because I've been trying to follow very complex legal arguments, in that sense of, and I understand why we may need to do. I'm more concerned about the new litigation that arises while you might be trying to sort out the things that you can agree on or discuss or work forward, because it just seems to be money going down the pan. So rightly, you're defending the public interest, but equally, you're spending the public money on maybe potentially lost causes, not because of your incompetence, because the incompetence of the previous administration and the way that they structured the contracts. And no doubt that you are pursuing other issues over the nature of those contracts and what advice you was given as LDDC or City Hall in the past, because they seem to be the root of the problem and the root of a problem of establishing that relationship that you really want with West Ham. Is that correct? I'm a bit long-winded on that, but that's not unusual for me.
There was a couple of things in what you said there, and the first thing you asked me about was cases that we've lost in the past. So my understanding...
Have we ever won? Have we ever won?
Have we ever won? Well, in a sense we have, if I just seek to explain that. To my knowledge, and Gerry will correct me if I'm wrong, there's been one major case that we lost quite recently, and this was around an expert determination. So there are some elements of the contract, again, unclear, that in order to get clarity around those elements, the contract determines that an expert would be asked to adjudicate those items. In this instance, and this was this year, that it came to fruition and to determination, there were 4 items to be determined, and of those 4 items that were unclear, the advantage in the expert's determination, 3 of them went to the West Ham side and 1 of them to E20's side. The one that went to E20's side is the issue of the track cover that we've discussed at length and has been played out in the public domain a little bit following the plenary. And so that's the one issue where the expert determined that West Ham could not insist on a claret cover, and we all know there have been negotiations subsequently. The other 3 items were related to access to television screens, hosting services for corporate hospitality for the football club, and who should pay for those. And the third item was whether we should have draft beer in the hospitality areas. And according to the expert, he felt that the contract ought to be interpreted that those 3 items should be provided, and therefore we are doing those in accordance with his determination and providing those things in the next period. This is the one legal piece, I think, that has been that we've had a determination on since the beginning of litigation. Am I right?
So one major piece, we've had a number of
smaller items playing.
Small injunctions over the course of the summer and subsequent claims that we're in discussion with West Ham about.
Now, one of the other aspects of the contract and the legal issues is the look and feel of the stadium. This is something that fans feel quite strong on. Most football fans would, in terms of going to a stadium that is their own ground. Do you understand what look and feel means for a football supporter, even though you're in those commercial negotiations, and understand why that may well be important, not just to the board of West Ham, but behind that board is fans really asking about or requiring those issues? Is there an understanding with the LDC about that, in informing the relationship that you're about to try and get a better relationship of? Because I just want to get your feelings on that. I don't think it was there before.
I think that, I mean, look, I'm not a football fan, actually, so let's be perfectly honest about it, despite my Liverpudlian roots. I think it's really at the heart of this, actually, a successful relationship. The concessionaire has event days on 25 days of the year. That doesn't sound a lot, but it's the whole of the football season, essentially, and that the football club is there. They bring global eyes to the stadium. They're a Premier League football club. They're a really important, successful tenant, and we appreciate that. That means that we have to do all we can to make the place feel like home as far as possible. I've been to a football match recently. I felt it did feel like a football ground with the wrap outside the stadium and the look and feel items inside. It felt fine to me in terms of a look and feel piece. It's not like an ordinary stadium. There's a long journey from the train. One goes through a park. It's a little bit of a different sort of environment. And it's a new ground that has a different feel because it's bigger than Upton Park and it's organised in a different way. Nevertheless, I think the look and feel is quite good at the moment from my perspective. Of course, it could be better. What we have to bear in mind is, one, we need to comply with what the contract says we have to do on look and feel. And two, we have to be sure that if we're enhancing look and feel and putting additional items in, that we can get them out for what we call clean stadium events. So when we bring athletics in, of course, that tenant requires us to have a clean stadium. And so the look and feel items have to be capable of going in and coming out. And this is, again, part of the commercial side of the business.
And just give us an insight into the nature of the contract. Is that because trying to get to the bottom of look and feel?
Yeah.
Is that the major stumbling block that you're going to try to get across? And
I don't think it's the major stumbling block. I'd say that in the look and feel clauses, there are some items that are very clear and listed in terms of what comes under look and feel, but other items are unclear. Yeah. And then a third set of items are very clearly not in the look and feel, and that's been our position. And that's why we've butted up in a few tensions around what constitutes is in the clauses and what isn't, and the clarity around those. Is there anything you would add?
There's a long list of West Ham signage rights that contribute to the look and feel in the stadium, and I think because the stadium, when the contract was put in place, the stadium hadn't been completed, the transformation of the stadium hadn't been completed, and I think that is at the core of some of the ambiguity. But then there are, as Lynn said, very clearly items outside of that we have commercial discussions with West Ham about, as we are obliged to under...
Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Just to quickly on the look and feel. I believe that currently you're in a dispute with West Ham. I think it's the Honours Board.
Yes.
Surely that's part of the look and feel. You know, every club has its Honours Board. It was there in the original situation. I think the year before you didn't charge to have it replace it, and this year you're trying to charge them. Is it? I mean, how much money are we talking about?
It's a small amount of money. So the Honours Board is not part of the listed look and feel. It's accepted by West Ham as an additional item. It was up last year for the first time, and they paid for it to be put up. So it's part of a suite of additional items that are not part of the contract. The reason why we haven't put it up this year, despite being asked by West Ham, is that there's an outstanding bill related to other look and feel items that haven't been paid, and that is where the dispute is. So our position has been, when that bill is paid, we would look to put the honours up. We are, I must say, we are still discussing this at the moment with the club, and so it's a matter
you're
of
holding
discussion.
them to ransom or blackmailing them then, is that what you think?
Well, no, it's not blackmail, because it's, in my mind, it's a suite of look and feel items that are related to each other. We have to go in every year and take the look and feel items in and out. Yeah. I think it's reasonable for West Ham to contribute to some of the cost in that regard in this particular case.
I think the other thing that I'd say is that West Ham have got signage rights, and they can choose to put their honours board on signage rights that they currently have. So in part, this is about West Ham wanting their honours board in a particular place, but they have there are other areas that they can put the honours board up to.
Is that such a bad thing? You know,
no, but,
I mean,
no, but
it's like me having an office here. I know it's not my office, I don't own it, but mine's the exception, but if you look at every other assembly members' offices, they have their pictures up and their posters and so on.
Yeah.
Because that makes it feel a bit more homely to them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to return to...
I don't think FM charges Caroline, or I know you've got every time she wants to put a poster up or down.
Yeah, I think though the relationship...
Rude, it is a little petty. And I think most people from outside this room would see it as being a bit petty that you're holding back their honours board because of an argument over an unpaid bill. Well, if they haven't paid the bill, take to court, you know.
Okay, let me come back on that if I may. I think having posters up on the wall of your office is not a commercial relationship. We are in a commercial relationship with a football club. It may seem petty and a small amount of money, but that goes to the other side too. If it's such a small amount of money, then they could pay it. And I think there's a principle here in terms of the annual cost of putting items in for look and feel and removing them that needs to be looked at, and that's what we're discussing with West Ham, the principle. And we're talking about a contract that's 97 years long. So it may seem petty and a small amount of money, but there are principles, a commercial relationship, and the long-term position to look at.
But to be fair, the cost of putting up and striking the look and feel items in relation to West Ham is not West Ham's fault. But then again, it's not. Neither is it your fault either, to be fair. It's because we have this ludicrous situation where you have a principal tenant who clearly wants their ground to look like it's their ground, and then every year, because of some ridiculous arrangement with UK Athletic, you have to strip it all out. And sometimes it might be worth thinking about how much of that do you have to, you know, everybody knows that's the stadium that West Ham play at. So actually, is it such a bad thing that if someone's playing cricket there or someone's having a concert there, that it's still got a lot of West Ham signage?
I totally agree.
I think that's what you should be looking at. You should be looking at reducing costs by reducing the amount that you do take out every time.
I think that's absolutely right. And of course, the external wrap is never removed. The external sign is never removed. The seats, many of the seats are badged in West Ham colours. We don't remove those. So there are lots of items that stay permanently. We do exactly as you suggest. We try to keep the items that have to come in and out sympathetic to removal and as few as we possibly can. But I think it's right that we offer, as far as possible, a clean stadium to all the other users coming in. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that in the UKA contract, it's part of our contract to offer them a clean stadium to a certain extent, though I don't have the detail in my head.
Probably worth looking at that quite
closely. Just before I bring Caroline Pitchin in, just earlier on, sorry, did I mishear you, or am I still in holiday mode? You said 2013 about 4 million. in legal costs? Was that
No, legal costs in relation to West Ham,
over
the last 3 years.
3 years.
To the end of this year, we're projecting 4 million. So just in relation to West Ham.
I've got an FOI response from LLDC saying your legal costs are up to 6 million. Does that include other issues?
Other issues, including other issues, we're projecting legal costs to be 5.8 million to the end of this year.
Okay.
I can't quite recall the FOI, but I know that it may include around, and I can confirm this, but around 2 million of costs at the very start in sort of 12, 13.
If you could clarify that and
yeah,
write to
absolutely.
Caroline, you want to ask questions this, and do you want to move into your second call question as well?
What I want to understand is this: what you're effectively saying, Lynn, you've come in new to this. The original contract is poorly written, and that is at the heart of a lot of these problems. Is that correct?
Yes, it's ambiguous in places and unclear.
So the lawyers you've got representing you now in court,
Yes.
I assume they're not the same lawyers who
No, they're
wrote
not.
this contract?
No.
And have you taken any action, or are you able to take any action against the lawyers who drew up this original contract? Because clearly there's some gaps in it which are now costing you, as you said, 4 million in the last 3 years in relation to West Ham cases.
It's certainly something that we've been asked about before, and we intend to have a look at that.
So you are going to look at that?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's extraordinary. We've got, as you say, 97 years left on this, and there are constant issues. And can you remind me how much West Ham pay each year?
Right.
The West Ham usage fee is set at 2.5 million, indexed by RPI. So for the 17-18 football season, and West Ham pay by season, the usage fee was 2.59 million. In addition to that, West Ham also paid or will pay in 17-18, did pay in 17-18, I beg your pardon, a further 225,000 for the rights to advertise on pitch-side static signage. They're the two biggies. There are a few other bits and bobs, but that's broadly.
So 2.8, 2.9 million.
Yeah.
Something like that they're paying to a year.
Yes. The pitch-side static is a two-year deal.
But, you know, the last 3 years you're spending 4 million in legal costs. You're basically making nothing from them. So it's just a loss having them there in some ways.
It's certainly a loss supporting West Ham match days in the stadium. I think there are two issues to be really clear on. The economics of the West Ham contract mean that the stadium suffers a loss for each match that we put on for West Ham, that we host for West Ham.
So I was looking at our figures here. So every match, West Ham match, it's 190,000 loss.
It's probably higher now because we're working on higher stewarding levels, and there are a number of things that have...
That was from an E20 board minute that we had.
Yes.
So you're saying it's now higher than that?
It is higher than that for a number... This year, I think the average costs have gone up for a number of reasons. One, because of the expert determination costs, annual costs that have increased, because we're paying London living wage, and...
So what is it now, the estimate?
The additional stewarding.
So with all of that, what is the loss for every match you put on?
I'd say in the region of 250,000. It varies slightly with stewarding, but...
Is that net? Because you obviously make around 30,000 from catering per match.
Yes.
So is it 220 then?
No, it's somewhere between 200 and 250.
Perhaps you can get us exact figures on that, because I think it's extraordinary. I think the public out there would find it astonishing that a Premiership football club is in the stadium and the public are basically subsidising it by 200 to 250,000 pounds a game. It just makes no sense. Let's get into some of the other detail. The seating costs. Gerry, you told us before you were going to get it down to 4 million. The letter that luckily arrived yesterday from LLDC says you're forecasting 4.6 million. Is that going to actually be the outturn, and how have you managed to get the cost down?
The essential, so some of those costs relate to sort of maintenance and storage, but broadly the cost of the seating is 4.6. The actual cost of moving is 4.1. This year, yes, we are very confident about delivering that number. The savings have been delivered in essentially not moving all of the seating, the configuration for the summer events. We've minimised the number of stand moves. So we've moved the north and south stand. We've taken seating off the east and west stand, so front 7 rows off the east and west stand, but substantially left the east and west stand in place, and that's delivered the savings.
So how many seats are you removing?
I'd have to go back to you on the number of seats that we're moving in each.
And compared to what you were, to understand,
Yeah.
it's still 4.1,
Yeah.
4.6 million pounds. It's still
Yes.
a huge cost.
It is a huge cost, partly driven by the elliptical nature of the seating, which means that none of the seating that is moved is a standard package. So it's all
bespoke.
bespoke.
Great. So that just adds more cost. You were doing a feasibility, Gerry, into long-term seating solutions. Where are you with that, and is there more capital investment needed?
We are advanced in that feasibility study, and we are hopeful that there is an improvement that we can make to the seating system to deliver some improvement on the costs. There would be a capital investment. It would have a reasonable payback. But we need to complete that work, and we need to also talk to our key concessionaires who have an interest in how the seating looks.
So would that be retractable type seating that other stadia have around the world, or?
A number of options.
Yeah, there are a number of options, but essentially it's not retractable. It is. Sorry, I'm going to get my terms mixed up, but essentially it's seating that comes out and seating that goes in annually. So not seating that goes in and out like that, but seating that comes out.
Okay, and that's different to what you've got now?
No, essentially it is a simplified and more regular type of seating. As Lynn said, there are a number of options, but it is a more uniform form of what.
The idea is that it would be easier to put in and take out, and therefore significantly lower cost than having to work with a bespoke system.
Yeah.
The issue you've got is, as I think you said, it's elliptical.
Yes.
All retractable, and other stadia where they have retractable seating, of course, it's flat, square.
Yeah.
But elliptical retractable is just not possible.
No.
It makes it far more complex. Yeah.
So really the complexity behind all of this is that you have athletics in there, and you have a contract with the Athletics Association, and actually that goes back to decisions a long time ago. It would have been far better to invest in athletics elsewhere and have a permanent, this is just going to bleed the public purse for decades and decades. It's extraordinary.
And you're right, we're dealing with a historical situation. Decisions were made about athletics. The stadium was built for athletics in the first instance. There's a commitment to a multi-use stadium here, but that brings challenges, certainly around the seating, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move into then, you said it would need capital investment. Do you have any idea what that cost is, or is it you're still working?
We're still working on those.
And when do you expect to have information on that?
We're hoping that we will come to a solution in this quarter.
So by the end of this calendar year?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then going into the new football season, we just talked about stewarding levels. You just said they've gone up considerably, and that's why the loss of every game has gone up. Do you want to give us any further information on the levels of stewarding, and what you're trying to do to reduce match day costs?
Yes, so I can actually confirm that I think the average cost of a West Ham match net of the catering revenues around 200,000.
200.
And okay. This year it is around 260,000. I will write though and confirm
net.
that. Net.
So it was
of the, net of the catering.
So it's
revenue.
gone up to 250,000, 260,000.
Yes.
Per match. The public is subsidising West Ham.
Sorry, can I just come in, not to do that, but clearly the catering contract is another bit of a mess. Is that fair to say? Two, the losses that you're saying and subsidising West Ham must be the same subsidies that are applied to other events that go in, including athletics and any other promotions that you put on in the stadium. So the catering element to that and the running costs of West Ham are, you know, in terms of your breakdown, are the same for any events that we're putting on, not just the 25. Or is your figure for the West Ham football matches, have you got figures for other eventing that goes
World
on?
Athletics
And is that the same?
Things. Perhaps you could give us figures for World Athletics.
We do have those figures, and we do have different arrangements for World Athletics. So
why is that then?
I imagine it's a
I
historical
think one of the questions that you would raise about the match day issue is the level of spec that's provided on match day. Let's not take, you know, in terms of, you know, the London living wages are given, right, and that would be a big bill. It's not an issue, and I think that's right that we should pay that. But the level of spec provided on match day is not what would be at any other football ground in the Premiership. I've never known the level of spec. You know, as a person who's been there on match day, having cleaners come round and sweep up after me, you know, is pretty novel. And I'm not sure if that's really required. I'm not saying that we drop more rubbish than anyone else, but I think if there's enough bins provided, I think people can make their way there to it. There's just little bits that you see about the spec that's quite high, that's not in the control of West Ham to reduce. It's yours. And so I'm just questioning that. I think there is a subsidy there if your figures are there, but I'm questioning the nature of that subsidy and the level of it. What is controllable by West Ham to, if they had ownership of that, would they cut and reduce to a reasonable level? What is not? And I'm just trying to get my head around other eventing that goes on there. We've yet to ask questions around the baseball match and everything else, the future one
next year,
that was going to be doing and all the rest of it. But, you know, I just want to get it in proportion. So maybe you will come back to us about what this level of subsidy is. What do we think is match day real subsidy to issues of spec compared to other events?
And for all the other events as well, to give us a feel. Yeah, I think that would be good.
Caroline's still carrying on. I interrupted. I'll bring you in.
Yeah, just on match day. I'm only interested in match day.
Yeah, come in, that's fine.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, on the match day, have you considered having a discussion? You've got LS185, who put in a bid for running the match days across all of the events they run, and as I understand it, they offered a much larger figure. I think we're going into that later. I don't want to go into that now, of how much income they would bring. But have you actually considered offering the match days to West Ham, to say to West Ham, okay, well, would you like to run your own match days? Would you like to be in charge of everything? Clearly, you might have to pay them to do it, but nonetheless, it's possible they may be able to do it more efficiently because they know how to run a stadium.
Well, it's certainly been a consideration, Keith, and it's been part of our discussions as part of the work to bring forward a new commercial plan for the stadium. So it's something that shouldn't be written off and should be properly considered. Part of the problems, I think, for that are that we've got 25 matches in the contract, but of course we're using the stadium for all sorts of different events as well. What we're not wanting to do is move around the responsibility for different events, for doing stewarding, safety responsibilities and so on, into different concessionaires. And it's quite important that we have a single statutory responsibility for safety and stewarding, for example, and that sits with LS185 if running all sorts of events in the stadium. It's not sensible to try and split that up between various people who were trying to do different things at different times and so on. So that's been one of the stumbling blocks to exploring that. But it's certainly something that we have considered. Jo, would you add anything else?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'd probably say we do have a 25-year contract with LS 185. So we have a contract in place for the provision of event management. And as Lynn says, that covers both the West Ham matches and it also covers all of the other events. I think there's one or two sort of responses to the various questions that I wouldn't mind if the chairman... So for all our other events, event day costs are covered. So although on the athletics contract, if you set aside things like the World Athletics, we don't make a lot of money out of the athletics contract, but they cover their event day costs. And similarly with concerts and other sports, they bring a net return in, so they cover their event day costs. So I think of the range that we have of events, West Ham are unique in not covering those because of the contract. And because of the contract, they don't cover their costs. I think the other thing I'd say on event day costs for matches is that about 70% of the event day cost relates to stewarding and security costs. And we, of course, don't hold the license, the safety license that is held by LS 185. And LS 185 therefore determine the level of stewarding.
Well, that's just another mess, isn't it, really? In some senses, it's just another mess. It just poses the question about the interrelationships of all these contracts and who's in control of what. You're forking out the money here. You should be in control of this, not them, and not with issues of that. I mean, it just says, I should have told members earlier on, Oversight are looking at an whole number of contracts for the GLA family, including these ones, to see what lessons we could learn, because we suspect that it wasn't just LDDC. We suspect somewhere in this building people had a say on those contracts or should have had a say of overlooking some of those aspects. But there's also been some other nature of contracts, like the Garden Bridge issue, like the Silvertown Quay issue from housing and land, where people are, the contracts aren't as good as they should be, really, and we're just seeing what lessons we can learn, and Oversight will be looking at that in the future.
I think the Mayor Stevens report dealt extensively with the issues, and as I say, one of their key.
But should we then? I mean, so forget. I've been pretty assiduous in my impartial nature of, even though I'm a West Ham fan. If it's 75% of the cost, and we are waving around some of the match day cost of beating West Ham over the head, saying, actually, you're not paying enough, morally are we right to do it? Albeit it's a commercial, you pick your weapons, and then you do battle in terms of that verbally across the table to get the best deal possible for either side. Should we, the clarity around some of these issues is not helpful about that relationship issues that we went back further on. Is that partly, I just want to pick up this again quickly, is that partly what you're going to try to achieve in the negotiations with West Ham and say, let's set that aside, and at some stage that will become public. There will be a clearer, different set of figures that you will say, actually, fair dinkum, West Ham, you negotiated a contract with whoever, this place here, ultimately, and you got a good deal, a very good deal. This is what we think that good deal is, but this we're not going to, we can't beat you up over the head of that, because we've messed up. This bit is a fairer issue. Is that what you're trying to do to establish the relationship?
Boundaries.
I think that's right. We are in a binding contract. West Ham won a competition, fair and square, back in the day, and that is the history that we're dealing with. it's really what more can we do now to take the stadium forward? What are the additional things we can do together, not only with West Ham but with other concessionaires and users, and also with our operators? What are the things we can work together on to make some difference to these highly complicated, interdependent contracts that we're facing at the moment? And unfortunately, it does take time because they're closely linked, as you've identified. There were two other points I wanted to make. Of course, and we recognise, and I said at the plenary, the operating costs are quite high. So we do have a job of work going through line by line to look at those, which we are actively engaged in. We're not simply leaving that to LS185. We work with them on that. We're a little bit hidebound on the safety side of things at the moment because LS185 want to exercise some caution at the start of the season and the end of last season, given what happened at Burnley. And at the minute, we respect them for that. And we don't have a locus to impact that, actually, because the statutory safety certificate is with LS185, although that is driving additional costs. There's one other thing I wanted to say about West Ham. Whilst we have different arrangements for concerts in terms of operating costs and UKA, we do have to recognise that a Premier League football club brings global eyes to the stadium. Mm-hmm. And so the negotiation that was done was also in recognition of commercial opportunities that could and should be taken in the future on the back of the benefit we get from a Premier League football club that we don't necessarily get from UK athletics. So the terms are different, and I'm sure back in the day all these things were considered, and that's why one of the other reasons we discussed at plenary that needs looking at and the lift needs lifting is where we go with commercialisation, naming rights and so on.
We've got some questions on that coming up. So we're moving
on. Just on match day, just again, sorry Caroline. You said earlier, Gerry, I think you said earlier that all the events wash their face except for the West Ham events.
For their event day.
Yeah, but I seem to recall there was a baseball match where you had to take some seats out. Would that have washed its face then if you had like the cost of...
Baseball's coming next year.
Baseball is scheduled to be played in the stadium next year.
Can I just say something about the operating costs though? When we're talking about event day costs here, there's also seat move costs.
Yeah.
And they are what they are. It would be very difficult to start attributing seat move costs to athletics or concerts or football. In my view, we should have those sitting there, because if we want to be a multi-use stadia, how does one attribute those costs? Who's got most rights over where the seats should be and so on is a very difficult thing to get into. So the numbers we're giving you here are out with seat costs. We're just simply talking about event day operation costs, so you can get a sense of that. And you can therefore compare back in the best way.
As a commercial business, if to put on an event you have to take a load of seats out which costs you £4 million and you only get 3 and 6 for doing it, that ain't sensible.
Yes, yeah.
And that's what clearly you have to take the seats out for UK athletics. That's part of your contract.
Yeah.
So yes, that's a fixed cost. But if there are other events which would require you to make that movement at a greater cost than the amount of revenue you're receiving, that's madness.
Depending on the event, it could be seen as madness. I think there are a number of things to consider. There's both the commercial fee that the event is paying to us, cost of seat moves as part of that piece, but also we've got to consider other things. We do have to consider economic benefit to London, for example. So let's look at UK athletics. Yes, we do have to modify the seating. We were able to make considerable savings this summer because we didn't take all the seats out that we normally take out. And UK athletics were very flexible in coming to the table for that conversation. That saved us quite a lot of money. We didn't move the east and west stands, and we normally would if we were going back into traditional Olympics mode, for example. But the point is, if we look at something like World Championship athletics, notwithstanding the immediate impact on day-to-day cost, it made a fantastic contribution to the UK economy. And the figures we have from the studies we carried out are over £100 million coming back to the UK economy for that event alone in 2017. I think we have to look a little bit more globally, therefore, around the kinds of events we're getting into the stadium and what added value benefits they have in a multi-use venue, which was the original intention when the thing was converted.
I take on board a lot of that, but surely that's almost a decision for the mayor to decide how much he's going to subsidise the UK economy or the London economy, because that's the decision, isn't it? But all those points you made, quite rightly as well, add up to the benefits that West Ham bring. You know, it's costing you £200,000 a time to do it, but actually with all those global TV rights and all the people thinking, oh, the Olympic Stadium as we all know it, it's probably worth that much in free advertising.
Well, I think that what I think's happening is that we don't get the same economic return to London and the UK from football. We know that. What we do get through a Premier League club is globalise on the stadium, which has its own value in that sense and is promoting the stadium as a venue. Of course, advertising and television rights, we have no take on those in the contract. All of those rights go to the football club.
Other than the stadium naming rights.
Other than the stadium naming rights, which is the deal we haven't yet done. Yeah.
Sorry, go on, continue.
Okay. I want to just get a little bit more into the numbers. So you're saying 70% of the cost on a match day is stewarding. So if we take your figure...
So stewarding and security.
And security.
Yeah.
And if you take that base set on, you're saying it's costing you 250,000, that leaves 75,000. So what is that cost?
That's a range of... That's a bundle of costs.
Give me an idea. I just can't understand what that would be. Cleaning possibly could be in
cleaning
there.
Included in that.
Clearly they're cleaning excessively if we hear what Len said.
Cleaning excessively. Licensing, things like you need to have facilities management staff ensuring the systems.
So facilities management, cleaning, licensing,
IT. There's a bundle of other things.
Perhaps you might provide us with a breakdown. It's very difficult to understand this. And as a layperson, you're thinking, how on earth can it cost? I understand security and stewarding costs. I get that. It seems huge. But I don't understand all the other costs.
Well, we talked earlier about hospitality, for example. Rights to what's being shown on the screen, charges from Sky TV, they would all be in this bundle, presumably.
I think the catering costs sit elsewhere.
Well, perhaps
on the catering, but hospitality, yes.
Hospitality staff.
The hospitality staff are included in that, which was one of the items in the expert determination.
Perhaps you can give us a breakdown so we can understand that and write to us. And also, whether you can provide, I'm sure you must have this somewhere, so we can really visualise this, what it's like when West Ham are playing the seats. When you used to take out seats, how many you used to take out, and a picture of what that looked like from above, and then what it is now. Because you keep talking about East and West stand, I can't visualise it. I want to actually understand what is it that's so different. And
the modifications for the athletics, for example.
Just so we can fully understand that. And then we're talking about you're trying to get your operating costs down, but what about trying to increase your revenues? What are you doing to try and increase revenue?
A number of things. So coming back to the things that we determine are additional in the stadium for West Ham, so we have commercial conversations with them around advertising rights and so on.
Okay. And
we mentioned earlier there's a pitchside static that West Ham pay for that we sold to them, so that's one example of an advertising right that we've sold on. That they then sell it on for advertising, obviously. So there are things like that. The other things that we're doing are driving the rate card ratio for concerts coming in, for example. So we have individual negotiations with all promoters who are bringing concert revenue in each case. And that might include a bundle of items. So there's the rental fee, covering their operating costs and any other extras. Now, that's all done at the LS 185 level. It's not done at the E20 level. So that's a commercial negotiation done by the operator.
Sponsorship.
General sponsorship.
Okay, I think we're good.
That they run. And then of course there's naming rights that we've not yet done yet.
Yeah, okay. And what about around catering? Are you looking to try to increase your catering revenue?
So we're in a contract for catering.
Right.
And again, that was won on a competitive basis. The name of the company is Delaware North that runs that contract. They're very well known and a good company in the market. They drove a competitive position. They also put a capital sum into the infrastructure in the stadium, and we take a percentage of that as part of
And that's
the
where you make
contract.
30,000 per match.
That's right, yeah.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just a clarification. Was Delaware North a subcontractor, the people that won the contract? Who was the original contract winners?
LS 185.
Sorry?
LS 185.
Oh, they subcontract out to them.
To Delaware.
Okay.
Yeah.
When does this contract end? This catering
25
contract?
years.
It's
Another
another
23 years to run,
Yeah.
presumably.
Sorry?
Another 23 years to run for the catering
Wow.
and for the LS 185 contracts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is, we're right to these interdependent contracts. This is one that we would, with hindsight, not enter into or not do. Why is LA? If there is, it's the contract with LH3 that gives us these subcontractors, or is it our contract with Delaware North? Is it 183's contract or our contract? Our contract is 183, and if they go, then what happens to that contract? We honour it?
Our contract is with LS 185, and they hold a number of subcontractors, including stewarding, catering, and so on.
185 end? Just remind me of that again. When does 185 end?
24.
In 23 years' time.
Another, they're all 23 years then. Okay, right. Okay, well, we need to look at these, don't we, in detail. Presumably, Lynn, if you were in charge at the time, you would not be recommending contracts like this, would you? Even if your advisors were telling you that we should.
On the face of it, you would think not, wouldn't you? I mean, I wasn't here, and looking back, I think the teams must have been under tremendous pressures. So the conversion of the stadium hadn't been completed when the contracts were entered into. So there were some sort of unknowns around the contractual pieces, as Gerry's alluded to, around look and feel and so on, when the building isn't quite complete. They are interlayered. I'm sure there was a rationale there back at the time for that. There were, in some of the competitions, many competitors, in others, only a few, and so one's faced with a choice in terms of signing up to a contract at the end of the day. A whole host of reasons might have been the
I've just never known a contract where you end up picking up the costs. It's not even E20 picking up the costs, it's you and this building picking up the costs.
We're coming on to 185.
Sorry, but I just don't know a contract like it. Is that?
I think there were a number of things as well that were underestimated at the time in terms of costs, including on the LS 185 side of the business.
And just finally on the seating, you were going to go into litigation, one that you were going to take on against these different contractors. Is that still the case? Try and get some money back?
Are you talking about the lawyers that advised us there?
It's the capacity issue.
The seating contractors.
Sorry, the capacity issue with West Ham? Or, are we threatening litigation on capacity issues with West Ham, or are they threatening?
It's West Ham against us.
Is that still going ahead as far as we know? Fine. Yeah. And where are we with the seating contractors?
We've closed out the seating contractor. I think, if you recall, the seating contractor went into administration in 2016, and their contract was taken over by their joint venture partner, and we have closed that contract out now. And there was a settlement within the constraints of the contract.
Okay, let's move on to Assembly Member Hall and income, naming rights and the stadium operator.
Okay, Chairman, if I can you just touched on it from something the Chairman said. If you're going to be looking at the lawyers that brought up the first contracts, you said you were going to be looking at that. Can you tell us when you're going to be looking at that?
Well, we're looking at it at the moment. It's quite difficult to go into any detail around that, Susan, just because it's a commercial position.
Fair enough, as long as we can have assurance it's being looked, because everything here seems to be drawn out.
Yeah.
And some of these figures are eye-watering. I think if the public knew that we were subsidising a football team for 250k per match, it's just eye-watering, and it's dreadful. So, Lynn, when are you going to secure the naming rights deal?
Right. So I'm aware that my predecessor talked about securing naming rights in 2018. There are a number of reasons why I think that's not the thing to do right now. Firstly, I think we're dealing with, as I say, 3 complex interdependent contracts, and rather than press ahead with naming rights just now, I think we should do what we can to tidy up some of the bitty business of those contracts. The naming rights environment at the moment, in terms of trying to buy and sell naming rights, is a difficult one, both because of where we find ourselves in terms of the wider economy and the threats of Brexit and so on, the uncertainty in the economy. But also we've seen instances, haven't we, around Tottenham Hotspur trying to get naming rights and failing and so on. It's not a great market just now. It's a different kettle of fish altogether, obviously, thinking about London Stadium. And thirdly, I feel that we need to very clearly understand the commercial opportunity. We have a team at LLDC who are largely public sector individuals. I'd like us to get really strong commercial advice before we go into the market and look for naming rights. I'm not sure the time is right. In terms of timing, I'd be confident in saying we'll be in a much better position in the middle of 2019.
But hasn't £500,000 already been spent on trying to, or wasted, yes, trying to find some? So that's another £500,000.
Yeah.
Wasted.
Historically, we've tried twice to sell naming rights.
Because they are worth an absolute fortune, aren't they?
Well, in terms of the valuation, I think this was in the More Stevens report as well, so it's in the public domain. The valuation of the naming rights is around £4 million a year at the upper level. And so we do have a valuation in the market that we would be aiming for as a minimum. So it's an annual fee.
I get that, but surely, given the state of the amount of money that's being lost, taxpayers' money, if there's an opportunity to secure a naming right, we should be doing it. Because
I think you're absolutely right, but it's failed twice. And what I want to be sure of is that we're approaching the market in the right way, because clearly something went wrong with the last 2 instances of trying to sell naming rights.
But surely we should be looking at it as an emergency. It's money that is yet more money that we're not making that could cover some of these other losses.
Yeah, I think the problem with looking at things as an emergency is, it seems to me, is that's what's happened in the past.
The problem yes, but with respect, the problem with something that's funded by taxpayers, there's never the urgency to get these things sorted as there would be if it was private individuals funding this, because they wouldn't be sitting on things waiting and waiting and waiting when there's a possibility of losing £4 million a year on these naming rights.
I appreciate the urgency. I also appreciate that just a short time ago a naming rights deal failed. It's important we understand exactly why it failed so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. And we are not in a position to put that into the market until 2019.
Okay, well, I find that very disappointing. Gerry,
sorry, do you want to give way to Keith Prince? Yeah.
Well, I think Leonie first.
Yeah, sorry, I'm suffering from some cognitive dissonance now between some of your previous answers about global eyes on the stadium, 100 million being brought in. And it's not just a football stadium. It clearly is a multi-use stadium, for better for worse in terms of the seating. But surely there must be somebody out there who wants to have their name on this stadium that is hosting stuff, athletics, such a wide range, football, where people are looking at it globally. I find it absolutely astonishing, if not... I think I agree with Assemblymember Hall, possibly even a bit cavalier, given that there's a huge call here on the public purse, why we're not actually pushing ahead with trying to get this marketed and making sure that we're looking very widely. I don't think, because it's not just football, you don't just need to look at, you know, the traditional people that might want to have their name on the football stadium end of the market, including, of course, in some cases, the name of the person who's put lots of money into the ground. You know, Reading is an example with their stadium name. There must be somebody who wants to be associated with World Championship athletics, baseball and so on.
So, I mean, the UKA have their own localised sponsors in any case. So Muller sponsored the games last time through the summer. I think you make a really extremely good point. But in 16-17 and 17-18, although this was a multi-use stadium, there were nowhere near the number of events in the stadium that have happened in 18-19. And so the appeal to the market is absolutely lodged with how successful you can make the stadium look and feel. So this year we've had the most number of concert events that have been highly successful. We had some rugby alongside the football in the football season. Saracens used the stadium, so we'd be able to promote it for rugby in between football with concessionaires agreement and some consultation. That's perfectly possible. But we only tested it for the first time during 18-19. Next year we have American Major League Baseball coming to the stadium. So I do think it's important to almost pick the moment when you're going to the market to be able to really demonstrate the multi-use impact. And as you say, the globalise into the stadium.
But then surely, I mean, you know, we've just explored the problems and pitfalls of having a contract that still has 23 years left to run,
yes.
Which I think we might all have views, quite strong views around the table on both sides. Surely then you can enter into a deal that says, you know, we've got this number of activities this year and the naming rights this year is only 2 million. Next year when there's more, you know, you enter into a deal where the amount increases and you have a break clause and say you have the naming rights for 5 years, but if things in 5 years' time, then we'll sit down and we'll renegotiate. You can have another 5 years, but, you know, we'll be looking at increasing the amount that we charge. To say that we're just not going to go back out to the market when you're saying that there's more events and there's a wider cross-section of events just seems a bit cavalier.
Chair, this is my position on the naming rights, and that I don't believe there's any more I can say on this just now.
Okay.
Just quickly then, I mean, £4 million is a magical figure, isn't it? Because that's the cost of moving the seats. So if we get the naming rights deal, we get the seats moved for free, effectively. I won't question you any more on timings, and all, although I would say that what we should have learned so far is that long contracts, I think we only touched on it, 25-year contracts is just a disaster, and we should be having short period contracts. But has there been a discussion with West Ham and perhaps, you know, opening up for West Ham to actually find a naming rights sponsor and then you getting a kickback on that deal?
We have not opened up that conversation to date, no.
Is it something you might want to consider?
We may want to consider it, yes. And as I mentioned at the plenary, West Ham are very involved in the naming rights in the sense that we have to be careful that we don't infringe West Ham's own IP. And so they're an important anchor tenant. When we come to talk about naming rights, we will have to speak to West Ham about who that sponsor is and so on and so forth, because clearly we can't have something that sits against advertising rights a club have already sold and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Line.
I want to come right at the end.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Susan, do you want to carry on?
Okay, Gerry, if I can ask you, LS 185, how much profit are they generating for you now?
In terms of the net commercial revenue that LS 185, so they provide us with the net commercial revenue from the events, but we pay a fixed cost and there's a net deficit on that contract. I think probably it's in the... Sorry, I just need... So in last year, the net return, I'm just going to add a few things up, 2.6 minus... the net deficit was about 3.5 million. I can confirm, but it's a sum of two numbers. So a schedule that I've got's got the event contribution, and then we pay them a fixed cost. So there's a net deficit on that.
Well, that's a bit disastrous, isn't it?
That's the nature of the contract that was entered into following a market competition. I mean, that's not to say that we're not trying to improve that contract, but...
In its bid document, it promised substantial income.
So the LS 185, the premise of the contract is that they would bring in net commercial revenue from events and sponsorship, and that would pay for and more than pay for the fixed costs of operating and maintaining the stadium that we pay them. Yes, that is correct in their bid. It was a substantially better premise than is currently being delivered.
Yes, it said that it promised that by 17-18 it would be delivering £5 million net revenue.
Yes.
So I go back, that's a complete disaster then, isn't it? That's not what it should be, that's not what was in their bid, that's not what was agreed. So what profit do you expect from them 18-19, 19-20?
18-19, the forecast is still for a net deficit.
So at what point will you consider finding another operator?
So there are commercial hurdles in the contract that don't come into effect until at least 2021.
The problem is because they're not fulfilling what they actually promised that they would do in their bid. So who's holding their feet to the fire over this? Who's having discussions with them? Because this just would not happen in a private, in the real world, in a private company. Everything we've talked about is losing money, is costing taxpayers money. What are you doing to try and turn this round?
We are in conversation with the operator about net commercial revenues and the costs in the stadium, because the two work together, obviously, to give us the baseline that we're at. You're absolutely right. The bid looks, on the face of it, as if it was well overstated and they're not making the kinds of returns they anticipated. Notwithstanding that, we entered into a 25-year contract. We have an opportunity in 2021 to look at all the net commercial revenues in the first period of the contract and open up a conversation with our operator at that point in time. But we are talking to them just now about how we make the situation better.
Yes, because they're not fulfilling what they undertook to do, are they?
They're not, but a bid and a contract documentation are two different things, and you'll appreciate that. We are in a binding contract as we currently find ourselves.
Yes, but it's taxpayers' money. Do you think the taxpayers are getting good value for their money?
No, I don't.
I don't think anybody around this table does either.
Concept of break clauses are always quite interesting ones, aren't they? Shame there wasn't one.
So how much extra, say by 2021, how much extra taxpayers' money do you think is going to be sunk into this?
I think we have an expectation of a continuing deficit position over the next couple of years to 2021.
And you've got no real answers as to how to bring us out of that?
We do have some answers around the commerciality that we're discussing with the operator, but I think our assessment would be it will be difficult to put it into a surplus position at the moment.
And yet you're still not looking at naming rights deals, which would
we are
be
looking
at least a way of getting some
we are
money.
looking at naming rights. What I've said is that, in my view, it's not the right time to put it into the market just now.
I would respectfully suggest that any way of getting money into an absolute black hole that is being filled constantly by taxpayers' money would be a good idea, because this is, in my view, this is totally and utterly unacceptable.
Right. Keith or Caroline, do you want to go after Keith?
Me?
Yeah, could I just the contract then with LS 185 again is faulty. Was it the same lawyers who developed this and wrote this contract as wrote the one with West Ham?
No, they were our current solicitors.
Right, and are you challenging them at all if there are issues with that contract?
I don't believe the issues are with the contract per se.
Okay.
The issues are with the economics that underpin the contract.
Okay.
So
The
clearly,
assumptions in the contract.
the assumptions, yes, about the sort of commercial revenues that could be generated, and the cost of operating, the net cost of operating the stadium.
Right. Okay. So are you looking to see if you can renegotiate the contract?
As Lynn said, we're in discussion
That's fully in discussion. Now, I'd read that earlier this year you had appointed a chief restructuring officer to start looking at the stadium's commercial performance and implement a restructuring plan. So can you tell us what they've been doing since when? Because the more I hear today, the more mess it all feels like it's in. I don't envy you.
Do you want me to take that one in first?
Yes.
So yes, we did employ a restructuring officer in last year, beginning of
Summer last year.
Yeah, summer last year. There are a number of strands to this. Firstly, we wanted expert professional help in looking at the complexity of these contracts and working out a longer term commercial plan for how we might better organise ourselves. We do have a commercial plan that we've been able to, at least in part, present to our board that starts to look at how we improve incomes, revenues and reduce costs, which we're working on actively. And so that officer has brought that forward. He's also been able to embed really good commercial acumen around the team, because that's quite important as we go forward, that our permanent staff are more able to negotiate contracts at a commercial level. And he has increased income, which has been really helpful to, in large part, offset the entire level of the costs that we've paid him. So he has paid for himself within this period, which is helpful. We think that although some really good work has been done, we're starting now to reduce the number of days that we're relying on that officer, because it is expensive commercial advice, and we think that we can now start to phase that out in a different way.
So he's been with you since last summer, summer 2018 or 2017?
17.
And an FOI showed that this person's being paid £40,000 a month. So you're saying that this person being paid that has more than covered that by increasing income?
Yes, the full-time, that is full-time equivalent cost. He now works a handful of days for us per week, 2 or 3 days, and that's decreasing. And so what you've got there is a full annual cost and so on. But yes, I am saying that the income that the commercial consultant has been able to bring in has covered his cost for that full year.
And what sort of income? Can you give me examples?
It's around
please?
Selling of advertising and so on to West Ham.
Right, okay, so that's, but, and also basically training your team to be more commercial in their negotiations.
Yes.
That's a bit worrying.
Well, I think training is the wrong sort of word, actually. It's embedding behaviours and attitudes within the permanent team that are important when negotiating with various concessionaires. That's quite important in terms of a culture, I think, of the organisation, and that's been advantageous.
Okay. Perhaps we could get more of a breakdown of his full cost and then exactly what income he's generated, just so we can see that.
Yeah, that's
Thank you.
Just on that point, I was that's a time, but that's a real eye opener. On that, so what you're saying is this character is brought in income, but it's advertised like advertising revenue. So is that ongoing income, or is it one-offs?
In this instance, it was a 2-year sale of an advertising opportunity to West Ham.
So there's no ongoing benefit?
Over the 2 years, it would be renegotiated thereafter. So after the 2-year deal, it would be renegotiated.
But you might have to...
Or open to the market.
Yeah.
Right.
Or sold on the
I'll be
open
interested to see
market.
those figures, because it looks as though you're paying 50 quid to get 50 quid from what you're saying.
I think it looks like that at the moment in terms of the break even, but we mustn't lose the value of the fact that he's brought together a good, strong commercial plan and pointed out where we need to be looking for future
I think that's what we'd be
efficiencies.
more interested in, what the long-term benefits are, because otherwise there's no benefit.
Yes,
right.
Indeed.
All right, I want to just move on, if I may, Chair, to the issue I I giggle, of the track cover. Now, in your earlier explanation, when we were talking about court cases, and I think it's 3-1 to West Ham, I think was the figure, you said that you'd won that case, but I think the facts are that the case went to this adjudication, whatever it was, and the judge, or whatever person you call them, found that the track cover was not fit for purpose, and that the ruling was that you had to replace the track cover.
That's right.
I don't see that as a victory myself.
So the point that was in contention from the West Ham side was that the track cover should be claret. In his findings, however, the expert looked at the clauses within the contract.
Yeah.
It's clear that we have to provide something that is fit for purpose. And he firstly looked at that and determined that it was not fit for purpose in his view, and therefore it needed to be changed. In his view, it ought to have been a contrasting colour to the pitch and the pitch surround, which is currently green. So rather than have the entire piece green, he adjudicated that it would be a different colour.
Yes.
What he did say in his findings was that he didn't feel that West Ham had the right to insist on a claret cover.
No, but did he not also add something along the lines, I haven't got the exact words, that he would have thought it would have been nice of you to consider a colour like claret? That's right.
Well, his additional words, and I haven't got it in front of me either, was he felt it would be favourable if both parties could come to a mutual solution as to what colour that pitch cover should be.
Good. So you're, and at the moment you're looking at Tottenham blue, and we're looking at claret. Anyway, so now I understand that West Ham agreed to pay the full cost. I think it's £380,000 off the top of my head to replace the track cover, and of course, in so doing, to get the colour that they would prefer, which seems reasonable. Now, you've rejected that offer, as I understand it, and at the moment, I believe you have asked West Ham to pay an annual fee.
Yeah. So there was an offer of covering the capital costs and the costs of putting the new cover in and out and so on that came to around £380,000. That would have been a one-off payment on the part of the football club, and I must say that this offer was for a dual-branded cover, so mostly claret, but with some London Stadium blue, which is a good compromise, we feel. What I had said was that, in my view, given the state of the financial situation that we're in, we felt that it would be appropriate that over the life of the contract, for a dual-branded cover, if there was an annual fee rather than simply a one-off fee.
Okay.
That was the discussion.
Yeah.
What, in terms of bringing you up to date with where we are at the moment, the football club and I are still in discussion about this, and the matter has not yet quite been settled.
Have they made you an offer?
Yes.
They have.
I'm not really at liberty to discuss that because...
I'm not, that's why I'm not asking any more than that question. Have they made you an offer? And you're saying they have made you an offer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, everyone finished? Can we just clarify, so E20, where are they in the picture of things at this moment in time? Do they exist? Don't they exist? Have you absorbed them? How does it work?
They're a wholly owned partnership controlled by LLDC.
Okay, and who...
so we consolidate them into our accounts now.
Right, and so they're your eyes and ears day to day? What do they do? What does E20 do? Help us understand how E20 works.
All of the contractual relationships exist with E20. So West Ham and UKA's concessions are with E20. The LS185 contract is with E20, but LLDC is also a subsidiary. They have so it's a partnership. They have an advisory board, and two of our LLDC board members sit on that board. I sit on that board as an LLDC. We have a subsidiary that is in the partnership.
And I think at the plenary we'd ascertained that they couldn't spend any money without any checking with you. They can't enter into any long-term issues in their own right.
There's very close financial control over spending money related to the stadium. Capital spend goes through board decision and level discussion. So what I said at the Assembly is that I personally don't have a delegation to spend large capital sums on the stadium.
Okay.
So it's wholly financed. E20 is wholly financed by LLDC.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a very
Not really.
simple question.
Well,
Is there any need for E20 to exist now? I understand originally it was set up to be a vehicle to accommodate the fact that Newham wanted to invest in this enterprise, and quite sensibly they've got out of the game. And as now it's a wholly owned, is there any need for this extra layer? I mean, we've got the LLDC, we've got E20, we've got LS185, we've got the subcontractors that LS185. Is there a need for this level of confusion? Can we not say that E20 existed to perform a purpose, it's no longer needed, and just do away with it and save some money?
I mean, the vehicle itself, as I said, all of the contracts are with the vehicle, and we have maintained the vehicle because it would involve additional legal fees to wrap it up. I think we would have to take that one away and consider.
I think you should.
It's not impossible to do, is it? Can I just? Yeah, go on, sorry.
It's not impossible to do, but the vehicle offers some protection in terms of the liabilities of the taxpayer.
Well, that's the interesting point. So of the 130 odd employees that you've got, as you said, you mentioned on the LDDC, are E20 employees LDDC people, or are they extra over and above the 130 odd? When you say you've consolidated the wholly owned company, blah, 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 there must be there's a small number of E20.
There are two E20 employees.
Are they only 130? You've got 130, how many
It's
employees?
about 150.
Oh, 150.
I think about 150
So you've got
on
150.
average.
Are those two employees LDDC employees or E20?
No, they're E20 employees. LLDC provides services into E20. So commercial, HR, comms are all provided from LLDC.
Okay. Leonie.
Sorry, I'm now a little bit confused as to exactly what E20 is, although we've sort of heard more information. You said that there is it's a partnership, but it is also simultaneously a wholly owned subsidiary of the LLDC. Can you tell me who the other partners are in it now, if it's not Newham Council?
There is a wholly owned LLDC subsidiary, South East London Holdings Limited, that has a 1% partnership with LLDC, so they're the two partners. The accounting treatment, forgive me, an accountant at heart, the accounting treatment is to treat it as a subsidiary in our books, so it's consolidated into our books.
Right, okay, but so who else is involved in E20 then? I'm still not clear as to why you're calling it a partnership.
It is technically a partnership. It is legally a partnership.
Status.
So its legal status is as a partnership, but there are no partners other than
LLDC and a wholly owned subsidiary of LLDC.
Of LLDC. Yeah. So it's LLDC in a partnership with another one of its other subsidiaries called South East London. Okay, so how does that extend additional protection? Because if it's a wholly owned subsidiary and treated as such in your accounts, I don't see how you get the additional potential legal protection.
There's a bit of history around this, isn't there? Because at one point, the London Borough of Newham was an active partner of E20, and then the transition resulted in this new structure just at the moment. All of the contracts that we've spoken about, all of their liabilities sit with E20, not directly with LLDC. So if we were to dissolve E20 or take E20 out of the equation and move those contractual liabilities into LLDC direct, we need to take a lot of commercial and legal advice around that, around the implications for those contracts.
Well, that might be quite a good thing.
In the Wild West of the private sector, you know, if there are E20 contracts, maybe in 2021, when you come to do it, is either negotiate further negotiations with 185, who I understand. I mean, I don't want to talk about taxes issues, but I did somewhere some time ago. They're not UK based, and nor is the catering company. It's not like they're paying taxes back into the UK in terms of their earnings, or are they?
Yeah, just to be clear, I think LS 185's contracts directly with LLDC, is that right? And the concessionaires are with E20.
Both E20 and LLDC are signatories. I do understand that LS 185 is a company registered in the UK and pays UK taxes.
So it does pay taxes.
Yeah, sorry.
I apologise for that before they rush to litigation on me.
Sorry, from their accounts, that would be my reading.
So E20 was really set up to recognise the contribution made by London Borough of Newham, but I'm still not sure in terms of the... I understand what you're saying about liabilities, but on those up. But can you write to us again of why it's still in LDDC's interest to keep it going? If it's not, you know, I mean, I thought it was managing these contracts because the contracts were with them.
Can I just get some clarification then?
Can you write back to us on that? Sorry.
Did you say that? I'm sorry. Did you say that 185 is contracted with LLDC or with a
and E20 jointly and severally?
Jointly.
Jointly.
So then, where's the protection then?
Does that comes back?
Not in the case of the LS 185 contract. The concessionaire contracts are with E20.
Okay, all right. Any more questions? I wish I hadn't asked that one at the end, but and all the rest of it. But okay, right. I think we'll move on from the stadium if that's all right with you at this moment. No doubt to continue in the future and hopefully with some more progress being made other than progress in the courts with the different relationships. Okay, let's move on to East Bank, and I think we're going to Sean, sorry.
Thank you. So East Bank, for clarity, is the former Cultural and Education District, and it's where you're going to be building or helping to build V&A, Sadler's Wells, BBC building, all of those kinds of things, plus on a big site for UCL and some residential homes now as well on Stratford waterfront site. So we know that the business case was, I think this was, the Mayor unveils a £1.1 billion vision was the press release, but I think that's just the government approving the business case in June and agreeing to investment. I think we've got 151 million coming from central government, and then through the Mayor via LLDC over the whole project, £385 million in capital investment aiming to be recouped. So can you tell us, if that's right, what actual steps have taken place, what's happened since June, where you are at now with these two big sites?
Okay, I'll do my best and Gerry will help me. So it is a significant investment in East London, pretty unprecedented in recent times. Cross-party support through the GLA and government, which I think is good. It brings arts, culture and education to the heart of the park. So alongside UCL, we also have the University of the Arts for the London College of Fashion and those cultural institutions that you mentioned. We had the announcement in June, as you say, and I think that those figures that you've quoted ring true to me. They sound right in terms of those individual investments from government and from the GLA. Since June, we have been further cementing our partnership. So you may recall that it was only in June that we had a very formal announcement that the BBC would be joining alongside the other arts and cultural organisations. So we've been doing quite a lot of work with the BBC to bring forward heads of terms and their agreement for lease. In this last period, we have agreed agreements for lease with all of the other occupiers of East Bank So BBC is running a little bit behind in that regard. We're working really hard with the partners on a number of fronts. So we have design and programme boards alongside those partners, each of whom are represented quite heavily to agree the design and fix the design for each of the buildings. And that design has been fixed now for most of the partners. BBC is trailing a little bit, as I say, with the view that a planning application for Stratford Waterfront would be submitted in October. I should say that UCL is slightly different in that it has already had planning for phase 1 of its development. It's on a separate site round the rear of the Aquatic Centre, and they are building their own building. So it is a slightly different relationship, although they're part of the East Bank Partnership, and they sit at the table for programme level meetings as well as senior meetings across all of the various partnership organisations.
Okay, that's really helpful. What you said about you're agreeing heads of terms of leases, is that the right point?
So there are two pieces. Yeah. We first of all went to a heads of terms stage with each of the occupiers, and then we formalised those heads of terms into agreements for lease. For all of the occupiers, we've done heads of terms. For the agreements for lease, the BBC are a little bit behind because they came to the party and confirmed their partnership a little bit later. So we've not yet finalised the agreement for lease for the BBC, but we expect to do that. November is the date we're targeting for that.
Okay, and each of these agreements are essentially that each of the people moving into buildings that are being built, and we're subsidising the construction costs.
Yes, we are building the buildings. Yeah. Yes.
So they'll pay rent over a period of, I think, 30 years. Is that the case in all of?
The leases are 200 years.
200 years,
yes.
Okay. And you've agreed rent levels for how long in terms of the agreement? I mean, are these contracts going to deliver precise amounts of rent, so we've got a very fixed and well-known income stream coming in to repay the capital investment?
So the occupiers will pay a fixed estate charge, which will contribute to the, and I think we discussed that as a previous meeting, which will contribute to the upkeep of the park. They don't pay rent, but they bring the social and economic benefits of moving their operations to the park.
So they'll pay no rent? Okay, I understood there would be a rent paid by the V&A, is that?
So the V&A have agreed with the owners of Here East to move their stored collection to Here East and make that stored collection more open to the public.
So there are two separate things happening with the V&A. They're coming into the Stratford Waterfront East Bank piece, but they're also taking space as a completely separate arrangement. They're also taking space in the Here East building, which is on the other side of the park. And they're moving their archive collection from the building in Olympia, Blythe House, into the Here East, and that is where a separate commercial deal has taken place in that building. So I think that's where the rental piece might be coming from.
Sorry, but can we just clarify? You're actually saying that there might be no rent paid for some buildings that they're occupying?
On Stratford Waterfront, the arrangement is that there is no rental payment, but there is a significant contribution to a set of strategic objectives which are socio-economic and arts and culture based.
Can I ask though...
What does that even mean? Sorry.
It's okay, you can jump in, that's fine. We've all got the same question in our minds now. How are we going to get the construction costs that we're paying for back? Is there a way of doing that? I mean, the business case has been agreed, so presumably these are laid out somewhere in the government documents that the Treasury will benefit because of improved health or education, or how do we know that this is public money well spent?
So the benefits of the scheme in the business case are listed as £1.5 billion worth of economic benefit to the UK and the regions. 2,500 new jobs and 1 million new visitors to the park. They are the benefits in the business case that went to government. I don't think it is the intention through rent to pay down the capital investment. It's simply a capital investment that the taxpayer is putting into this proposal.
Okay. So you said that the economic benefits are 1.1 billion. Is that right? And that's in total?
The cost is 1.1 billion.
Yeah.
The economic benefits have been valued at 1.5 billion.
So that's a cost-benefit ratio of 1.5.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
That's not very high.
That's not taking into account the jobs and the new visitors, and it's not taking into account the benefit of having this new arts and culture district there for the long term in terms of the opportunity locally, obviously, which is pretty not really easily valuable, but it's something that contributes to the opportunity in East London for decades to come that can't be measured.
Yeah. Okay, so assuming we get those benefits, one of the things we're liable for still is the construction costs. So what are we doing to make assurances that we're not going to run over on this, given what's happened in other sites? Because obviously that's a slightly fragile cost-benefit ratio there. You don't want the construction costs to run over too much before you're looking at a loss and compared with the benefits that we get.
I should just clarify that the construction costs are funded by a bundle of costs. Some of that money comes from central government, some of it comes from the partners themselves, and some of it comes from realising receipts for commercial development and residential development. So some of that is funded variously. So it's
I don't think it matters where the I'm really sorry. It doesn't matter where the money comes from. Whether whether there's a bundle of 20 sources of finance. I think Sian's question was about trying to make sure there are no cost overruns, and we have a bit of a history.
I think the key question here is who's liable for cost overruns. Then
yes,
is the government's investment fixed? That's quite often the case. Is our investment fixed? Are the overruns met by the commercial partners?
The government's contribution is fixed. There are different arrangements with different partners. So, for example, UCL are delivering their own buildings, and they will be responsible for their own cost overruns. Yeah. With UAL, there's a mix between the two, but with the other buildings, the risk sits with LLDC and obviously subsequently City Hall. The risk of delivery.
Right, okay, so what are you doing to mitigate those risks then?
I think what I would firstly say, and obviously I'm coming here quite fresh, but looking back on the park and the history of what LLDC and earlier organisations have delivered, notwithstanding the conversion of the stadium, there's been an awful lot delivered on time and on budget. The Olympics itself was delivered on time and on budget, the conversion of the venues into different uses. There's a lot of infrastructure being put into the park. The park was opened on time in 2014 and handed back to the public. We've built 3 schools on this site. So I think, the organisation has a track record of delivering on time and on budget. If we wanted to focus on the conversion of the stadium, we'd have to say, wouldn't we, this is a completely unique and bespoke project. There's no comparator across the country in terms of what we did with the Olympic Stadium in converting it. These are far more simpler constructs, actually, in terms of moving forward into building these various buildings on the waterfront. The whole thing is being managed, program managed and construction managed by an experienced operator, an experienced construction manager. And we have a budget that we're working to that has contingency within it and a number of assurances wrapped around it and governance to make sure that we are sighted early on any difficulties and can put mitigation measures in place. The other thing to add is we're designing it hand in hand with those partners. They've had a hand in the design, but at the end of the stage 3 design, they have to fix it and hand it over so that we can get a really good handle on any cost increases and work through mitigations and value engineering should we need to do so through the contracting process, because clearly we also have to put contracts into the market, and there is risk in that, like any large construction project that we simply don't have control over until we have the bids coming in and we can assess them and so on.
Okay, two more questions. When will there be spades in the ground on each of the sites? Do you estimate?
Yeah, end of next year.
The enabling works are due to start in November. So the contract is under procurement at the moment. So the very first pieces of work.
And the UCL sites are further ahead now, so they're in planning already. So will they start first, or are you hoping to?
So actually, they've already been through planning, but they've had some hiccups in their procurement, and I think we've more or less caught up with them, essentially. So we know that they have let a contract for the first phase. And so they're in final discussions about finalising that contract now with the contractor.
Okay. Just to go back to the estate charge, which is the main thing people will be paying towards LLDC. That fully covers maintenance, other things. We're not going to get into a situation where suddenly, I don't know, all the roads need to change and all the street lights need replacing, and that's an extra cost that we cover. We're insulated against changes in spec or demands on some of the sites.
So the estate charge isn't a service charge. The estate charge is a contribution to the upkeep of the park. So it's not like a service level agreement. It's a contribution that all people who live or work on the park will pay towards the upkeep of the park.
So this is the street. This is outside of the edge of the buildings.
It's outside actually of the Stratford waterfront island. The partners will be responsible for the upkeep of the Stratford waterfront estate through an estate management company. So their contribution pays for the upkeep of the park outside of their Stratford waterfront estate. Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, so that's maintenance,
here,
as in lift replacement. My colleague suggested.
Yeah,
that sort of maintenance of the buildings and the grounds.
Maintenance of the buildings. They're fully repairing and operating leases. So the individual partners are responsible for the upkeep of their buildings.
Right.
The four buildings sit on an island site. And there is an estate management company that the partners will pay for to upkeep, for example, the public realm within the Stratford waterfront site.
Yeah, and that's an estate management company that they are contracting to fulfil obligations to you. It's not like LS185 that will.
No, they control that company, and they're required to upkeep the public realm on the Stratford waterfront site.
They procure it, not us. So if it doesn't perform,
they will control it.
Lose
they
out.
will control it. Yeah.
Okay, we're just asking all these detailed questions now. Go on.
A question on that. Thank you, Sean. So we've just talked about the fact that Newham withdrew from E20. What will be in the arrangements for the estate management company should one of these people decide that they no longer want to occupy their premises, in terms of the others picking up the cost of what might become an empty building? Is there any role for the LLDC in that? How is that being covered in the way that the estate management company legals are being drawn up?
I would want to confirm this, but my understanding is that LLDC would step in and procure new tenants for those with obligations to the estate management company.
So there could be potentially some costs involved in marketing empty buildings if, I don't know, one of these companies, the London College of Fashion, let's say, decides that this is not a very fashionable place and they want to go back to Shoreditch or wherever they were before. And then the marketing costs, but also you might have the cost of having a building there that's currently not occupied. You'd have to pick up for example, at least the insurance costs on the building and probably maintaining it as well. Is that what you're saying?
Can we come back to you on the detail of
Very happy,
what would
very
happen in
happy.
that scenario?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
I think it's quite important because we've got another number of other little holes elsewhere that seem to be trickling cash out.
The concern is where and how might LLDC end up picking up liability for the management company. We can pick that up.
Because it sounds good now if you've got someone in every building, but just in case. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Thank you, Sean.
No problem. In construction terms, what happens if one of the tenants pulls out halfway through the process?
The tenants are under contract. I mean,
right,
Lynn discussed. We've entered into agreements for lease with those tenants, and they're under contract. So there are various conditions, planning being one. Before those agreements for lease are converted into leases, but then they'll be under the obligations of the leases.
Okay, and then finally on that, have you completely given up on trying to get any philanthropic donations towards any of this?
No, not at all. We have a foundation, the Future for London Foundation. We have recently appointed 2 new chairs. It's a joint chairpersonship. They, if the committee members don't know, are Baroness Lola Young and David Bell. They have started their work in earnest. They are appointing a new executive director to help them with that. There is some funding confirmed already, small amounts of funding already confirmed that helps with the day-to-day operation of the foundation. But we will be, the chairs will be reinvigorating the foundation moving forward. We'll be starting some philanthropic fundraising in earnest next year.
Why would people give money to this if it's just to take money off the bill that's the public purses? Like, you know, it's the 385 million that we're trying to offset a bit with some of these donations.
In part.
Why would anyone do that? What are we offering them?
So I think we have, as part of the deal, we've retained some of the naming rights for the buildings, for example. So there's some, there's a potential deal to be done in there. So the organisations don't have full naming rights over those buildings. We've retained some of that. Obviously, there are some tensions there, and we'd have to work closely with them because an organisation like the V&A might want to name a room in the building and so on. But we do have commercial rights over naming and so on for the external fabric of the building. So that's subject to negotiation.
I think also that with a programme of this size and nature that will bring regeneration benefits to the east of London, the connection with community, I think that there will be philanthropists who would want to be associated with that. I think it's one of the largest regeneration projects, certainly in the country, possibly in Europe, that we believe will attract interest in association.
But in exchange for having their name on it, more of a slightly more like a sponsorship deal,
or for indeed promoting programs that connect the community with these partners, or working with partners in different ways, supporting bursaries for education.
Yeah, no, I know, Sally. I can totally see why somebody would support something that did things. It's just, why would anyone pay to offset our construction costs? That was
I think there's a programme, a revenue position and a capital position. I think it remains to be seen how successful we can be in the capital area. But what we have done is maintain some of our rights in that regard with regard to the buildings to try and exercise and lever that into the future.
Okay. Great. Obviously there's a bit of housing there's a bit of residential development. Is that being done as a joint venture? Is that
the proposal is that it will be delivered as a joint venture, but it's yet to go into the market for procurement.
And is the aim to have a bit more control over this project than
so for the residential, in the past, LLDC has sold land under development agreements. We would hope that if we were in a joint venture arrangements, well, we know because of the contractual arrangements that we would have more of a seat at the table in terms of controlling alongside any developer. So the likelihood is that we would enter into a 50-50 JV arrangement with the GLA sitting beside us as the major investor.
Okay, that's useful. And in terms of the affordable housing component, which obviously impacts on viability and returns and things.
Yes.
The Mayor, in the press release in June, seemed to confirm that across all the remaining sites on the Olympic Park, he'd be looking to get 50%.
Yes.
Stratford Waterfront is aiming, I think in the consultation, for the master plan at 35%. Is that fixed now? Are you aiming to go higher? I mean, 35% is kind of a mayoral minimum right now, so that... Is that a minimum?
So the idea is that over the remaining sites in the park, of which there are around 3,200, 3,500 dwellings still to be built and still to get planning permission, that we will achieve a 50% affordable housing in a portfolio approach. Stratford Waterfront will come forward as the first of those sites and is offering 35% intermediate product on the waterfront. And that is fairly fixed at the moment. So we've taken a report through our board that sets out the provision, as landowner, that sets out the provisions of the planning application, and that will go into planning for a submission in October, end of October, November, and is we hope to get a determination by next May.
Okay. So in terms of not dropping below 35%, I mean, those are the terms on which you're going to offer contracts to bids to potential partners.
Absolutely. When we go to the markets, it will absolutely be a minimum of a 35% position, and then we'll see where we get with the market on bidding and so on.
Yeah, so having bid for it, we would not be expecting those partners to turn round and start arguing viability because they knew that in advance.
No, we wouldn't. Yeah. We would be looking for a minimum of 35% on that site.
Okay, thank you.
And that will be the planning requirement in terms of the... So we get planning first, and then we go into the markets thereafter.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. It's only a very quick one. Can you just confirm where a property is being given rent-free, that the people taking over that place will be paying the running costs towards everything else? So at least they will be paying. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Cooper.
So finally, last set of questions, I think. I wanted to ask you a bit about the running of the project that we've just been discussing with Sean. Obviously, one of the important issues is trying to make sure that the whole of this massive development is not something that lands from outer space and that local people feel is literally nothing to do with them. So my understanding is that there has been community consultation, including via the university, and I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about how that is going and if you feel that local people really are starting to get involved in what is now being called the East Bank. Would you say that everyone if I walked in out of Stratford Tube and was wandering around in the Stratford Centre doing a bit of shopping and I said East Bank to anyone, would they know what I was talking about?
I think that's really challenging, as with any development. What we can say is that in the public consultations that have taken place into the run-up for the planning application itself, and of course there have been a number of iterations of this because the design has changed over time, the responses have been overwhelmingly positive, and the numbers of people getting involved in the consultation have been very respectful actually for a planning consultation. Nevertheless, it's a planning consultation.
Could you give us a sort of a figure for that then?
No, I couldn't, but I could give you. I could write to you. I know they are strong, but let me get you those numbers. Any planning consultation is extremely dry, quite frankly, whether it's local plan or a planning application. And so your average shopper in the Westfield shopping centre is probably unlikely to be completely familiar with East Bank. What I think is really impressive, though, is that these partners have been partners for some time. So notwithstanding the BBC coming late to the party, the partnership that LLDC has had with V&A, with Sadler's Wells and with London College of Fashion and UCL has spanned many years in the run-up to East Bank. What that has meant is that they've been extremely proactive in reaching out to the community and making the right level of connections, both with school children and local organisations and community organisations. And it's really impressive to see what impact they're having. So this year they ran integrated summer schools and so on. Many children were involved in. Previously we've seen robotics classes run through with local schools, teenagers through UCL. And so they are determined to try and make sure that it's not a spaceship landing actually, and that we have active involvement, particularly in the 4 boroughs that surround us. Now, there's certainly a way to go with that, I think.
I just chose the Stratford Centre because obviously that's quite near to where the East Bank is happening.
Yeah.
But I mean, could you tell us a bit more about the way that the relationship has been developed with the schools then? Because obviously getting children who are currently at school to see it as just something where they can, that's going to be integrated into their lives, I think is an important point. I mean, I live much closer to the other V&A because I'm in southwest London, so there's a bus that goes directly to South Kensington for me. Are things like mapping how you might, bring school parties in once the buildings are finished? Is that work being done, as well as those discussions about what's going to be there?
Yes, and I think that we've seen the most significant engagement with schools in the schools that are in and around the park, in the Mercial Development Corporation area itself. What must be developed. So for example, Sadler's Wells have been part of the curriculum for a whole chunk of the last year in, what's the name of that primary school? Begins with M. in Mossbourne School, primary school, and have actively been working with children on dance classes and so on. And that's quite long established. What I think there's less of, and is really important, and we're now talking to the borough leaders about, is about other schools that are beyond the reach of the LLDC and its planning red boundary, if you like, to make sure that we're getting far more engagement and fingers into those schools as well. And that will mean that we'll need to step up activity in the next 3 years whilst we build the buildings to make this thing as absolutely relevant as possible for young people. And that means quite a lot of work, I think. But the partners, they're impressive in their determination to do that. I think they're very aware of the local dynamic. They're very aware that they want to pull in local talent. There's an awful lot of diverse talent in East London that they can benefit from, frankly, and they're aware of it and wanting to exploit it. So it's quite positive. I'm really impressed with it.
Well, I think that's really important because otherwise it does remain isolated.
Absolutely.
And I think there's no point having a cultural and education district that isn't then bringing a much wider range of culture perhaps into that area, but then threading it through into people's lives.
I very much feel that this is, it's a large construction project, it carries risk, and that's important budget and programme wise. But actually, the success of East Bank is about how relevant it is locally and how it impacts in arts, culture and educational terms. That, I believe, is what LLDC should be measured on in terms of the impact of this thing. And we have about 3 years to do that before these buildings start opening their doors and so on. So I do agree, it's really critically important.
Yes, I think that's the true legacy, is making sure that it is fully integrated in that
Absolutely,
way.
yeah.
Okay. Now, Peter Hendy has said that projects tend to go wrong at the very start and then they can't be fixed. So what are you doing to make sure that this project is absolutely fine right from the very beginning?
If I talk about governance and then ask Gerry to talk about assurance and risk and so on, the way we've structured the programme is we have a number of layers of governance for East Bank. So first of all, we have an East Bank board that I attend together with Peter Hendy, the chair, and the very senior representatives of each of the partners. And that happens on a quarterly basis. And that's about really making sure that at the most senior levels, people in those organisations are bought into what's happening on the ground, whether it be the design of a building, how it looks and so on, and critically, how the programme is running out. So that we've got a number of interventions at all levels of the organisation. So we think East Bank Board at the highest level is a really important leadership function. We then have a programme board that's chaired by one of my executive directors, the Executive Director for Development, and all of the organisations are represented there at project level. So it's a programme board, and then we have a number of specialist boards underneath that and individual work streams. So there would be an individual design work stream, for example, with the partners, again, each of whom are represented. And we mentioned earlier our strategic objectives for socio-economic purposes. We have a strategic objectives board and work stream that looks at the programming for local people and make sure that we're joining things up across the park, across community organisations, into schools and so on. So those boards are already in place and steering groups. In addition, we have three levels, if you like, of assurance. And Gerry is very much involved in those and takes responsibility for those.
Well, can I just say that one of the areas that I'd like you to cover, probably in assurance and risk, and maybe you might want to cover it in terms of your comments on governance there. Obviously, there may be lessons that we can learn from what has happened with the relationship with the London Borough of Newham and West Ham over the development of the E20 arrangement. Are any of those lessons that have been learnt from that being brought into the governance structures and the issues around assurance and risk as you develop the East Bank?
So if we pick up the most senior level of the East Bank board, I very much take your point. The relationships with these partners and the local boroughs is really important, actually. Ultimately, as we discussed at plenary, the Development Corporation isn't here forever. When these organisations open their buildings, and in however many years' time, when the Development Corporation doesn't exist or is a different body, then these buildings will be in Newham. They are in Newham Borough. And so the relationship with the new leader of Newham has been very much on our minds. Just next week, we are holding a dinner for the partners, now that the BBC is embedded, and we have our two new chairs of the Foundation for Future London. We will be holding a dinner for the leaders of the London councils and the mayors. So, you know, in Waltham Forest, we've got the London Borough of Culture coming up in 2019, and here we are with a bunch of arts and culture partners. So there's a really strong relationship to be built those there at the highest levels. So the new mayor of Newham will be coming along to the dinner. She has also been fabulously supportive in reaching out to the partners on an individual basis and having her own engagement and building her own relationship with each of those, which I think is really helpful. All of the mayors and leaders sit on our LLDC board. We are very cognizant that our board is aware of what's going on, both in terms of the construction project and programme. And so we are regularly taking East Bank updates in some detail through our board. And that's at every board meeting, not just occasional board meetings, so we'll get an East Bank update. And it also goes in some detail in terms of risk assurance and other matters monthly to our investment committee. So where the boroughs don't sit, it's very much a subset of the board, but that's how we're managing that at the moment. In the socio-economic work stream, where we're reaching out into communities, some of the people sitting around the table there in the steering groups are people from the boroughs, because clearly they're already running socio-economic programmes locally. They're much closer to the schools and the head teachers than we are, and so we need to build those relationships into the boroughs to make sure that works on the ground.
So you seem to be saying the relationship has been sort of embedded and threaded through with the boroughs into much of the structure for the East Bank board and its subsidiary elements.
Since the new political arrangements in May, this has given us an opportunity to come forward and with the new mayor of Newham. I mean, clearly, we've only just had the BBC from June. We've now got a full suite of partners, 2 new chairs from Foundation for Future London. Now is the time to really consolidate those relationships, we think.
Okay. So coming on to Gerry then, to think more about assurance and risk and any lessons that need to be learned.
In terms of the assurance regime, so we've adopted a sort of an industry good practice of 3 lines of defence. We have at the top an independently chaired risk and assurance board that's attended by all of the partners, but also by government and also by City Hall. So there is an independent, we've appointed an independent auditor or assurance body, and they have done a number of reviews that focus on various elements of the programme that have been very helpful. And they also do sort of quarterly updates. So that forum is an important forum. Internally, then we have an assurance regime that involves our programme management office, but we also use, for example, external firms to review at points in the programme how cost, programme and risk is assessed and reported, and they, if you like, at stage reviews, they look at the totality of the programme, the cost and the risk, and give us a view about whether the programme can be delivered in the time for the money, and that is shared with all of the partners as well. And then we have the as Lynn said, we use a programme management partner that is very experienced. And they work very, very closely with our team. So all of the processes and the sort of the first line controls, which are reviewed through successive lines of defence, are in place and operating.
Okay, well that sounds good.
I don't know if that's given you...
It sounds good, but I think, the previous experience on this site, the previous experience on other large, complex sites, for example, in my own patch, I have Battersea Power Station, and they've now brought in a new experienced project manager, and what was turning into a disaster yet again on another complex site now seems to be pushing forward for the time being, at any rate. Okay. I think it's really important, coming back to the questions that Sian was asking earlier on, that you have the facility for very, very intensive monitoring once building work is underway, because quarterly updates don't necessarily sound often enough to me.
No. I mean, the second line of defence will produce a monthly review of the project, so that there are sort of successive, if you like, it's like a triangle. There are successive activities. So there's a lot of control activity on the ground, and then reviews across the whole of the programme monthly, and then the Risk and Assurance Board meets quarterly. But all of I think the degree to which the partners are embedded in this project is very significant. So they have, they're involved daily on agreeing designs and agreeing the planning and agreeing, they agree the procurement documentation. I mean, it's a very enmeshed with the partners project, and I think that is one difference from previous projects.
And I think it's important to say that as a new chief executive, and with Gerry's experience in recent years, we're very cognizant of where things may have gone wrong or seem to have gone wrong in the past. Gerry and I both have a personal involvement on a monthly basis at those meetings. So the chief executive and the deputy chief executive are in the room when things are being aired, so that we are over them. This is really about getting very early sight of where things might be going wrong, being able to discuss them with the construction manager, who actually is extremely experienced. So Mace have put in an extremely good construction manager who has heaps of experience in much bigger projects than the ones we're talking about here. And I personally am seeing him on a regular one-to-one, so that he has the opportunity to tell me anything that he is concerned about, whether it be a partner problem, a problem with my design staff that might be holding things up, because programme is really important to budget here. And in addition to that, I know that relationships with these people are really important. So partner relationships are really good. We also have the construction staff sitting in the office. They sit amongst us. They have full access to me, and I have full access to them, and Gerry the same. And those relationships with our staff are quite important. So there's nobody can hide and say, oh, I sent an email about this and nobody did anything about it, and therefore there was inherent delay, and so on and so forth. we want to, as far as possible, expose all of that and make sure those relationships are really joined up. There's also a relationship at a very senior level with Peter Hendy. So Peter Hendy has a regular meeting with the Chief Executive Officer at Mace. And so we're meeting at all levels, both with our construction partners and our partners on the ground. We're very cognizant of the large nature of the project and its reputation.
Okay, I think Susan wanted to come in.
Yep, thank you. 3 very quick things, please. When will the East Bank be completed?
2022 is when we are targeting opening the first buildings, and London College of Fashion opening their curriculum in September, October 2022. Some of the other buildings will open slightly later because of the length of time they need to do the fit out following the shell and core handover.
So what are you aiming for in an ideal world?
2022 for London College of Fashion.
Yeah.
V&A will be the year later, 2023. I understand BBC would be between 2022 and 2023, not yet fixed in terms of the length of time it takes them to do the fit out. And Sadler's Wells, I think again, 22, 23. Yeah.
Okay, fine, thank you. You said most of the responses to the consultation had been good.
Yes.
What is the main thrust of the ones that the consultation wasn't good? What is the main
Affordable
thrust of the
housing.
complaint? Affordable housing.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The Mayor also promised skills and jobs for local people, so how is that going to be monitored?
It will be monitored through my Executive Director for Regeneration, who's responsible for all of those things. So there'll be regular reports coming out on
so
the
we'll be able
programme.
to have access to
Absolutely,
that.
yes.
That's fine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions from other members? I've got one, but it's around the location of near East, here East. And it's really about deliberation and processes. So you've got two potential partners all bidding for one piece of land. I think you've got Truman's on one side, Delancey, who are in the Here East building talking to you. And really I want to know about the deliberations you're going through, about whether there's a open bid process or a closed bid process with one particular partner, and what's your deliberations that you're going through, and how does that work in terms of that?
This is a very recent development that you're talking about here, Chair. So very recently, we were approached by the current occupiers of Here East about the opportunity to extend their building into another piece of land that is currently adjacent to Here East. And I'm not quite sure whether the members are familiar with the area. So there's the former broadcast and press centres that have been converted into the Here East buildings. And adjacent, but completely separate, is a multi-storey car park. The multi-storey car park doesn't have a site allocation in our local plan, and we're reviewing the local plan at the moment. There's no particular plan to develop that site. It's strategic industrial land in terms of its designation. However, we have been approached by the Here East partners, which does include Delancey as the key investor, for a conversation about whether we would consider an extension of Here East onto that piece of land. There's a lot in that to discuss. We've only just started those discussions, and we haven't really formed an internal view at the moment around whether there's validity to that or not. Ordinarily, if the public sector was developing a piece of land or selling it, it would run an open OG procurement competition, and that is always the rules that we comply with. And so there's a long way to go in those discussions. The Truman's element comes into it in that Truman's brewery currently occupy a site on Fish Island, which is in, it's not actually in Hackney, it's in Tower Hamlets, the site that they occupy. We had been in conversation with them about coming into the multi-storey car park as a meanwhile operator and taking some space there. Now, I say meanwhile, but that would be a 20-year occupation into the car park site, necessarily because of the level of investment they would need to put into a new expanded brewery, and they wanted to build a bar there. So when I arrived at LLDC, those conversations were live. No deal had been signed. And what I asked my officers to do was have a look at whether that was a good solution in the short and long term to a site that, as a car park site, is not wholly utilised currently. So it's a bit up in the air, to be honest with you, in terms of the mix at the moment. And we've not signed the meanwhile use deal with Truman's.
And it's not exactly, one wouldn't preclude the other in some ways.
No.
So if there could be a bringing together of those
There could be a bringing together, there could be a public sector competition, there could be a one or another solution, but it really is very early days.
The trouble is that sort of recently the administration's got itself into a bit of trouble, not in the GLA, on its land use down at Silvertown Quays, where someone would be in substantial discussions, about to sign, according to them, and then someone trumped them that come along, another company come along and trumped them.
Right.
And it was a bit, it was pretty messy about how that process worked and who was responsible, who wasn't, and the blame game. And that's why I was asking about the processes and deliberation that you're going through about some of these issues, because the Trumans were in long discussions with the LLDC, and of course another offer comes on. It's always complicated. Yeah. You as a public sector organisation, about how things are perceived. I'm quite interested about that and how things are taken forward.
Yeah.
Okay, so we might well come back to this at a future time.
Yeah.
But I think I've seen.
Yeah, it was just to add the same thing, because I thought the negotiations with Truman's have been going on since January, and that they certainly think that they were almost at they got agreement unanimously from support from LLDC, and that the heads of terms were being negotiated, and it was about to be signed off when suddenly Delancey became involved.
No, I just want to be clear about this. It was way before Delancey came to the table that I asked the question about whether this was an appropriate long-term use for a site that's underutilised for car parking. So I asked that question of my officers as soon as I arrived. What are we doing with that site? It looks like a development site to me, and I was thinking housing at the time. It won't be developed for housing because it's strategic industrial land, but nevertheless, it's not fully utilised currently. It has some coach parking in there, some car parking.
So
and then the next question, Leonie, is a 20-year meanwhile use for just part of that building the best value position that the public sector can get for it? Should we not be running a feasibility study for the art of the possible? Only after that did Hearies come to the table and say, actually, we think we might have a proposition that ought to be examined. Now both parties may have a proposition. Our job is to transparently get the best price, and that will either result in running an open competition for that site, or one or of the other solutions that we might look at, of which we don't have detail at the moment, but it has to be done in a transparent way so people understand exactly what's happening.
But I think it's really important then, if you wanted to draw a line under that at that point and say we need to be considering all of the options, that was then also conveyed by your officers to Truman's, and certainly...
Yeah, I've met Truman's myself, and I'm meeting them again on the 2nd of October, and I've said this to them, that we must have a clear and open process. And, I'm sorry that I've stepped into this process for a 20-year meanwhile use on an empty site, but on the face of it, that doesn't look like good value for the public sector to me. And I think it's difficult, because I know Truman's are in a difficult position. They've been negotiating for some time, and they have their own lease end on their building. But I don't want to rush into a situation that we find is not the best long-term situation, because otherwise we'd be sitting on a half-empty site for 20 years with only part of it utilised. I don't think that's good value either, really.
Thank you. Can I begin by thanking you both in the way that you've answered our questions? Look, whilst we don't want to reflect on the past, and nor should we be holding you to account for things that took on the past, whether it was in your responsibilities or not, you just can't help thinking that some of the issues around the stadium are about these contracts and everything else that comes with it in terms of the relationships. So, you know, where you've made some progress, what we desire is faster progress, I think. Whilst we might not ever get to a zero subsidy for the stadium, I suggest we wouldn't, we need to see those costs coming down. And I think you've demonstrated in the area of the seating in the short term some progress being made. Clearly the key one for unlocking other issues is the relationship with West Ham, and get into a sensible relationships and bottoming out what those real costs are. Now, we've heard some costs bandied around today. We're going to ask you, I think, in a letter form of some of the information that we want. So we'll clarify to you of what degrees we want, so we understand what that full costs are on match day or not, as the case may be. What's a fair proportion that should be allocated to West Ham? What is the ones that we should be picking up? Because that's the way the world is in terms of security and other issues. And just, you know, so, I've got to say, I feel that you are getting a grip on some of the issues, which is contrasting the previous years where I don't think there was much grip, to be honest, as things went on around them. So, no doubt we are inviting at a future meeting Karen Brady. We're aware of the exchanges of letters and clarifications about who said what and where, and we see that part of getting to grips with that relationship. And by the time, hopefully, we have Karen before us, that some progress might have been made.
Hopefully.
But if not, no doubt we will have you back in the future to report further on that. On the rest of the issues, what we must always remember, this is a great compared to other legacies of Olympic issues, despite the problems that we've got, this is still one of the best legacies of any Olympics, apart from, I think, probably better than Barcelona, which is one of the better ones I can think of, to be honest, but in a different context. So thank you for that, and let's engage with you, keep engaging with you, but we will write you a letter clarifying the further bits of information that we request. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry. There's a couple of other items I've got to deal with. There's me rushing to go out. So we're can we note the report in today's discussion?
Right.
Okay. We're here we go. We've got and then we've got to item 6. Can we agree the work programme include the proposed changes to the schedule of meetings of 2019/20? Blah, 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 and everything else that goes with it that's before you.
Agreed.
Can we agree? Date of next meeting. The next meeting is the 21st of November at 10 a.m. That's in the chamber. 8, there is no current, no other business. Can we agree to close the meeting?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy days. Yeah, well, as long as it's in my diary, I'm doing it. Oh, right, okay. Fine.